In the sprawling, often grey suburbs of Liverpool, crime is a language spoken in whispers, threats, and sudden, brutal violence. But on May 23rd, 2020, that language was shouted for all to hear. It began with the mundane sight of a white van pulling up on Crockdale Road West, a quiet street of semi-detached homes. A man in a courier's uniform walked to a door, clipboard in hand. It was a perfect illusion. Within seconds, 3 other men, faces obscured by balaclavas and hands gripping machetes, stormed the house behind him. The chaos that erupted lasted just 4 minutes. When the van sped away, it left behind a man slashed to the bone, a scene of bloody carnage, and an empty space where 30 kilograms of cocaine, worth over £1 million, used to be. The robbers had vanished, but they had kicked a hornet's nest of unimaginable size. This wasn't just any stash house. It was a depot for the Heighton firm, one of Merseyside's most feared and ruthless crime syndicates. A cartel built on decades of violence and ruled by the iron will of Vincent Coggins, man, whose reputation for torture preceded him. When Coggins learned of the heist, he didn't just want his product back. He wanted retribution. He was convinced it was an inside job, a personal betrayal. But as the hunt began, a fatal mistake was made. The wrong name was whispered into the wrong ear, setting in motion a desperate chain of events that would see a father offer up his entire fortune to save a son who was completely innocent of the crime. This is the story of that £1.3 million ransom, the criminal empire that took the money but still thirsted for blood, and the digital ghosts that watched it all unfold. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. For weeks, the crew had watched the house on Crockdale Road West. It was unremarkable, blending seamlessly into the suburban landscape of West Derby. There were no signs of the wealth or danger it contained, but they knew. They knew it was a crucial hub in a vast narcotics network, a place where high-purity cocaine was stored before being distributed across the country. At 9:30 a.m. on that Saturday morning, they made their move. Ben Monks Gorton, playing the part of the DPD courier, was the decoy. When Paul Glenn, the firm's trusted custodian, answered the door, the trap was sprung. Brothers Jason and Craig Cox, along with seasoned criminal Richard Caswell, burst in behind him, their faces masked and their intent lethal. Machetes were drawn. Glenn was savagely attacked, slashed so deeply the blade hit bone. His son, present in the house, tried to intervene but was quickly overpowered. Blood spattered the walls as the robbers worked with chilling efficiency. They weren't there for a prolonged fight. They were there for the product. They knew exactly where to look. They loaded 31-kilo blocks of cocaine into their bags, a haul with a street value well over £1 million, and were gone as quickly as they had arrived. The white van disappeared into Liverpool's network of streets, leaving behind a scene of visceral violence and a gaping hole in the Heighton firm's inventory. The robbers believed they had pulled off the perfect score. What they didn't know was that they hadn't just stolen from a gang. They had declared war on a dynasty. By 7:41 p.m. that same evening, Vincent Coggins was staring at a screen, watching the grainy CCTV footage retrieved from a neighbor's camera. He saw the white van, the fake courier, the masked figures, and then he saw his £1 million stock vanish in a matter of minutes. The footage didn't show faces, but it confirmed his worst fear. The audacity of the attack meant it had to be personal. No local crew would dare to cross him so brazenly. It had to be an inside job, someone close, someone who thought they could get away with it. His rage was volcanic. He immediately logged onto his EncroChat phone, a supposedly impenetrable encrypted device favored by high-level criminals. Under the handle Moonlit Boat, Coggins began issuing commands. His tone was measured, but his words were laced with venom. He tasked his most trusted lieutenants, Paul Woodford, Olive Scooter, Robert Jarvis, Rivergrass, and Michael Earl, Fearful Oak, with a single mission: find the names. The rumor mill began to churn. Initial whispers pointed towards Kenny Dorries, the son of the attacked stash house minder. Then another name, Paul Glynn. But these leads went cold. Then, out of the digital ether, a new name emerged and stuck. Brian Maxwell Jr. There was no evidence, no motive, no link to the scene. Maxwell Jr. was a known dealer, but he operated quietly under the wing of his father. For Coggins, in his paranoid fury, that was enough. He declared to his crew, "I've got him nailed on." The stolen drugs no longer mattered. This was now about making an example. He wanted blood. When Woodford asked if they needed weapons, Coggins replied he was already stocked up. He asked Jarvis to source a Pineapple Street code for a hand grenade. The hunt was no longer a fact-finding mission. It was an assassination plot. Brian Maxwell Sr. was not a man who courted attention. Unlike the violent theatrics of the Heighton firm, his criminal enterprise was a model of quiet efficiency. His empire wasn't built on fear, but on property. He owned dozens of houses across Liverpool, bought cheap and converted into sophisticated cannabis farms. From the outside, they looked like ordinary family homes. Gardeners were paid to mow the lawns and plant hanging baskets. Cars were parked in the driveways. Inside, however, was a different world. Floors were stripped bare, rooms filled with grow tents, reflective sheeting, and carefully shielded heat lamps, all run on bypassed electricity meters. It was a low-profile, high-yield operation that made him a wealthy, if invisible, figure in the underworld. His son, Brian Maxwell Jr., had grown up in this world and was being groomed to take over. When Maxwell Sr. heard the whispers linking his son to the Coggins robbery, a cold dread washed over him. He knew his son was innocent. He demanded proof, and his son provided it. Time stamped CCTV footage from their own home, showing he hadn't left the property on the day of the heist. But Maxwell Sr. was a veteran of the game. He knew that in Vincent Coggins's world, the truth was irrelevant once a narrative had taken hold. A price was now on his son's head. He made a decision born of pure paternal desperation. He would not try to reason or fight. He would pay. He knew men like Coggins understood only two things: violence and money. He sent a message through a trusted intermediary, requesting a negotiation. His offer was staggering: a portfolio of property, a house, and a massive sum of cash, totaling £1.36 million. In exchange, he asked for one thing: his son's life. He would even take the blame himself, letting the firm believe he had orchestrated the robbery. It was the ultimate price for peace. The proposal reached Vincent Coggins: a payment of £1.36 million to settle a debt for a crime the Maxwells hadn't committed. On paper, Coggins agreed. The deal was a way to recover his losses and reassert his authority without further bloodshed, so it seemed. The handover was arranged. Titles to properties were transferred, and bundles of cash were passed through intermediaries. On the 3rd of June, 2020, the transaction was complete. Brian Maxwell Sr. believed he had bought his son's safety. He instructed his son to remain in hiding, but he breathed a little easier, thinking the danger had passed. He was tragically mistaken. Behind the scenes, Coggins's rage had not subsided. On his EncroChat phone, his messages to his inner circle told a different story. He boasted about having accepted the payment, but made it chillingly clear that the deal was a sham. "The dad can be left alone for now," he typed, but confirmed that Brian Maxwell Jr. was still a marked man. The execution was not canceled, merely postponed. Coggins planned to let the heat die down, wait for the police attention to fade, and then, when they least expected it, he would go back and finish what had started. The ransom was never about forgiveness. It was just business. The blood debt remained outstanding. While Vincent Coggins plotted murder and Brian Maxwell Sr. paid a king's ransom, they were all blissfully unaware of one critical fact: they were not alone. Their entire world, built on the promise of encrypted secrecy, was a glass house. In early 2020, an international police operation of breathtaking scale had achieved the impossible. French and Dutch authorities had successfully hacked into the central servers of the encrypted network. Suddenly, law enforcement agencies across Europe had a live feed into the minds of the continent's most dangerous criminals. In the UK, this intelligence windfall, codenamed Operation Venetic, was passed to the National Crime Agency, NCA, and the Northwest Regional Organized Crime Unit, NWROCU. For weeks, detectives in a secure office had been watching the heightened firm's drama unfold in real time. They read every threat from moonlit boat. They saw the order for the hand grenade. They watched as the Maxwells were falsely accused and as the £1.3 million ransom was paid. They were now faced with a terrible dilemma. Intervening would mean revealing their hand and alerting thousands of criminals across the globe that EncroChat was compromised. But not intervening could mean letting an innocent man be murdered. They chose to act. On May 27th, police officers arrived at the known addresses of Brian Maxwell Jr. and two other men Coggins had targeted. They were served with Osmond Warning's official notices informing them that their lives were in immediate danger. Simultaneously, police served Vincent Coggins, Paul Woodford, and Robert Jarvis with threat-to-life disruption notices, making it unequivocally clear, "We know what you are planning. We are watching you. If you act, you will be taken down." The chess game had changed. The hunters were now the hunted. With the police now openly watching them, the heightened firm's plot stalled. But the EncroChat data continued to flow, and it began to paint a very different picture of the Crockdale Road robbery. The digital trail led investigators away from the Maxwells and directly to the real perpetrators. The crew was composed of Salford brothers Jason and Craig Cox, their associate Ben Monks Gorton, and, most crucially, a man named Richard Ricky Caswell. Caswell was the key. He was a known Liverpool criminal who moved in the same circles as the heightened firm. After the robbery, he had played the part of a helpful associate, pretending to help Coggins identify the culprits. In reality, he was the inside man. His own EncroChat messages, under the handle Bushy Tree, revealed that he had masterminded the heist, providing the Cox brothers with the location of the stash house and details of its security. He was feeding the firm's paranoia back to the Cox crew, keeping them one step ahead of retaliation, while cynically watching the innocent Maxwells take the heat. Once the truth was known within the underworld, the retribution was swift and brutal. Caswell, already in custody on a separate matter, was cornered in prison and slashed across the face with a makeshift weapon. Threat-to-life warnings were issued to the Cox family, and properties linked to them were targeted in arson attacks. Jason and Craig Cox fled to Spain. The real robbers were finally unmasked, but not before their actions had nearly cost an innocent man his life and his father a fortune. The net was closing. With over 72,000 messages from the heightened firm's crew analyzed, police had constructed a complete blueprint of their criminal enterprise. They had evidence of multi-kilo drug deals, conspiracies to murder, firearms trafficking, and the entire command structure, from Vincent Coggins at the top down to the couriers on the street. The time for surveillance was over. It was time for the takedown. Under the banner of Operation Sub-Zero, at 6 a.m. on the 16th of June, 2020, coordinated raids were launched across Liverpool and Knowsley. Armed officers smashed through doors in a wave of synchronized arrests. Vincent Coggins, Paul Woodford, Robert Jarvis, and Michael Earl were taken into custody. The men who had terrorized the region for years were pulled from their beds, their illusion of invincibility shattered. In the following days and weeks, the rest of the network was rounded up. The empire that had taken 3 decades to build was dismantled in a matter of hours. Even Francis Coggins, Vincent's brother and co-founder of the firm believed to be operating from the Costa del Sol, was now a wanted fugitive, his criminal world collapsing around him. In the courts, the case was monumental. The The defense fought fiercely to have the EncroChat evidence thrown out, arguing it was inadmissible. But they failed. The judge's ruling set a legal precedent that would seal the fate of hundreds of criminals across the UK. The guilty pleas and convictions came in waves. Vincent Coggins, the furious kingpin moonlit boat, was jailed for 28 years. Robert Jarvis and Paul Woodford, his loyal and violent lieutenants, received 25 years and 24.5 years respectively. The real robbers were also brought to justice. Jason Cox received 14 years and 8 months, while his brother Craig got 11 years. Richard Caswell, the inside man, was handed 7 years for his role. And then came the Maxwells. Their story ended in the deepest irony. Brian Maxwell Sr., the father who had sacrificed his fortune to save his son, was jailed for 13 years for his cannabis empire. The £1.36 million he paid as a ransom was never returned. It was seized by the state under the Proceeds of Crime Act. His son, Brian Maxwell Jr., received a staggering 18 years and 2 months. Terrified that the hit was still coming even after the ransom was paid, he had armed himself for a war, sourcing an AR-15 assault rifle and an AK-47. He was jailed not for the crime he was accused of, but for the desperate measures he took to protect himself from a threat his father thought he had paid to erase. The Heighton firm was broken, its leaders imprisoned, its power extinguished by the very technology they thought made them untouchable. It was a story of greed, paranoia, and misplaced revenge, where a father's love was met with cold-blooded deceit, and where justice, in the end, had a price for everyone.